Hello, welcome to Dundrell's podcast. I'm your host, Justin. For this week's book review, we're reviewing Shadowrun, Secrets of Power, Volume 1, Never Deal with a Dragon by Robert and Charrette, published by Rock. This is part of a trilogy. This book is part of the Shadowrun universe, which Shadowrun was a tabletop RPG from the 80s. It's basically about a cyberpunk world where magic has returned, and with it, different magical creatures like dragons. People start turning into like orcs, ogres, and elves, right? And other people started getting magical abilities. So our main character, Sam Werner, who is American living in Japan, working for this Japanese company called Renraku. After his operation to get a data jack installed, which a data jack is basically this thing it's basically a port that they put in your head to help to connect to the Matrix, which is what they call the internet, right? Helps you navigate through the internet or different devices better, even though you can just use mouse and keyboard. So he gets word from his bosses that he's being demoted and he's going to have to move to Seattle to work at the archaeology, right? He works there as a researcher. On that same day, he gets the bad news that he's being demoted and sent back to America. His sister went through a transformation and turned into one of the fantasy races, right? Which they don't tell him which one it is. And in Japan, anybody who gets turned into one of the fantasy races, like orcs or goblins or whatever, gets put on an island, right? So he gets separated from his sister, right? So on his trip back to America to work in Seattle, his jet gets hijacked by Shadowrunners. You have Sally Sung, the mage, Ghost, who's an American Indian street samurai. You gotta look up those terms. Dodger, who's an elf decker. Deckers are like the hackers. And Cam, the orc, right? They hijack the jet, take Sam and his fellow employees as hostages. One of them is Alice Crenshaw, who's like a security officer at Renraku, who develops like this hatred for Sam, right? So what happens is that Sally and her gang plants this bioweapon at the archaeology, not knowing what it is. They think it's just going to make people sick for a couple days, right? Turns out it's going to kill everybody at the archaeology, right? Sam figures this out and is able to convince Sally and her gang to go back into the archaeology and remove the bioweapon, right? A year passes and Sam hates his job at the archaeology. He's not gonna. He clearly got shafted by Sato, one of the higher ups at Renraku, right? And is not being allowed to contact his goblin sister, which they joke that she was turned into a goblin. We don't know, right? And he just, on the recommendation of his girlfriend Hane, he decides to quit Renraku. But you can't just quit. In the future, you basically, when they say wage slave, you're basically you are basically a slave to the corporation, right? So he gets in contact with this female elf called Heart, who was partnered up with this serpent dragon called Tession, and they get hired to extract Sam and his girlfriend Hene. Turns out, Sam and his girlfriend being extracted was part of a front by Hart and her group to put in a doppelganger, which is this magical monster who is made from like science and magic to infiltrate Renwaku and discover the secrets of their AI project, right? Because of that, Hene gets killed, Sam almost gets killed, and is able to survive and decides to go on this quest for justice against Hart and Tession and whoever their employers are. And he gets reunited with Dodger from Sally's group and is able to recruit them to join on his crusade against Hart and her Shadowrunners, and to find justice and find out why he was almost killed, right? So the book, I gotta say, compared to other Cyberpunk books I've read, this is really good. It's very complex. It has a very complex story. I honestly thought, starting to read the book, that there wasn't going to be a lot of action. That it was just going to be like a corporate espionage like thriller, right? And it turns out there's lots of action in the book. There's like halfway through the book, there is an aerial dogfight between a jet and a fucking dragon who can use magic, by the way. Right, which was badass as hell. You have battles with street samurai having duels. You get like gunfights with missile launchers and whatnot, and people slinging magic spells, right? Which they have this one magic spell that can like that's basically acid, and it can melt you like as if you were eaten by the blob monster, right? So I actually liked this book, and I was surprised at how good it was, considering I remember this. I thought I had read this book, right? I mentioned in my science fiction book collection that I read the book and I hated it. Turns out I had mixed that up with Knight's Pawn, which Knight's Pawn also has a dragon character. This book has 3 dragons in it, right? And it has 3 dragons in this book, man. Which that's one of my problems, because like, man, they have a shitload of characters, and they don't really give you character descriptions until later on in the books. One of the characters, they don't even tell you what she looks like, which is Alice Crenshaw, who develops this hate boner for Sam and wants to get at him. Which they developed this rivalry between Alice and Sam. Sam doesn't even know that he has this chick after him, and like she ends up dying, right, and has nothing to do with Sam. So it was like, what the? They set up this rivalry between Sam and Alice, and nothing comes up from it. One of the other problems I have the book, besides from the character descriptions, and then that they didn't like, they had this rivalry with Alice and Sam, that nothing came of it, was that Sam is not your typical cyberpunk protagonist. Sam is basically just like a lawful like good like character, and usually you have morally gray characters, right, as protagonists in cyberpunk books, because like lawful good characters can be a bit boring, and Sam is a bit boring and milquetoast as a main character, but he kind of like near the end of the book, he kind of becomes more of like I wouldn't say a badass per se, but like, you know, he starts to get a bit of an edge to him as well. So we got kind of the character development. One thing I don't like about Sam is he has 2 dogs, and as a dog owner, I kind of hate this guy. He abandons his dogs. He does get reunited with one of them at the end of the book, but man, what a jerk! He abandons his 2 dogs, right? But like, if they had come with him, they would have gone killed. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, I would say I should mention the dialogue in this book is not the greatest, and there's some slang here and there that's pretty bad. Also, there were another book where the editor should have been fired because there were a lot of like grammar mistakes here and there. Not enough to like distract. Not enough that like it ruined the reading experience, but it was like enough, man. Like, oh my god, I would have fired this editor, right? But yeah, I would say this book, compared to other like cyberpunk books, this is a 7 out of 10. But if only because of how bad a lot of those cyberpunk books are. But compared to other books, this is a 6 out of 10. But I think if you're a fan of cyberpunk books, you would probably enjoy this book. I had a great time reading this, and I would definitely read the sequels, right? I would definitely read the sequels. Some of the illustrations, though, are ugly, but you know what? We're lucky to get illustrations anyway, so I'm not going to complain about illustrations, in a book, especially when you have a really cool cover, right? So yeah, that's it for this review, guys. For our next book review, which should be next week, is George R. R. Martin's Inside Straight, a Wild Cards novel, which Wild Cards, for people who don't know, is a superhero novel universe where George R. R. Martin and his author friends write short stories in this like universe that they created. And there was actually a graphic novel published by Marvel Comics in 1990, and Marvel Comics apparently has a new Wild Cards series coming out soon, so I'm looking forward to that. And if I enjoy this book, I'll definitely try to pick up some of the other Wild Card novels as well. Also, the Shadowrun book that I mistook this one for, Night's Pawn, I'll try to review it either this month or next month, right? So yeah, that's it for this review, guys. Peace. We'll definitely review more Shadowrun books. Alright, bye.